What kind of king chooses a cross? How can a man executed by Rome be the one through whom God retakes the throne of the world and renews it? What's up, everybody? I'm Tyson Putoff, and this is scene 26 of the JesusX30 challenge. We're walking through scene by scene my 3-book Jesus project, Jesus, the Strategic Life and Mission of the Messiah and His Movement. All 3 volumes are out now in print and ebook. Get those wherever you buy your books, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, dozens of other booksellers around the world. You can also check it out for free on public library apps like Hoopla or Overdrive. So get your copies in whatever format you can. Follow along. You're going to get a lot more depth in the volumes than we can go into in these short little episodes. We're in scene 26. So this scene takes us into the center of the gospel story, the crucifixion and the burial of Jesus. So all 4 gospels record it. Remember, throughout the life and messianic campaign of Jesus, not all gospel writers record every event. Some of them pick and choose, but when we get to this last week of Jesus's life, by and large, all 4 gospels record these key events, including the death and the burial of Jesus. And each gospel writer, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, makes the same point, that this is not an accident. This is not an interruption in the life and campaign of Jesus that he didn't expect to happen. This is the decisive act of Jesus's mission and campaign. What looks like defeat and failure, even to those around Jesus, even to those he's been talking to and living with and working with for the last 2 years of his public campaign, this might look like defeat, but this is actually the critical moment of victory in his battle against sin and death and chaos. The love of God is confronting the systems of violence and sin, not by overpowering them as we're seeing, but by absorbing their worst, taking their biggest punch, the haymakers that they're throwing, and turning those into redemption. So after being sentenced by Pilate, Jesus is handed over to the soldiers, and they carry out the standard Roman routine before execution. And it's both physically excruciating and publicly humiliating. It's a horrible and awful situation for anyone to undergo deliberately. It's on purpose. So Matthew and Mark describe them clothing Jesus in purple robes, twisting thorns into a crown and mocking him, calling him the King of the Jews, obviously as a moment to mock him. To them, that's a parody. To the gospel writers, though, it's clear irony, because the one they mock truly is the king. The coronation happens, though, in an entirely different way for Jesus than it would for a normal king. In a normal situation, the king would go through elaborate, highly expensive ceremonies in which they're celebrated and they're worshipped and they're honored and they're bowed down to and they're coronated and enthroned. Not Jesus. Jesus's enthronement, his coronation, happens through violent and horrific suffering. So Jesus is forced to carry the patibulum, the crossbeam of the cross, on his own through the city, through all the crowd lining the streets toward the place of execution. After he's been beaten and tormented for so long, he can't carry the crossbeam on his own. And the soldiers compel a man named that's in the crowd, Simon of Cyrene, to carry it for him. Mark 15:21 records this. So Simon's name and even the names of his sons are remembered, interestingly, clearly indicating that this moment changed his life. And it's interesting, just as a note, that oftentimes discipleship begins that way, in those unexpected moments of sharing in the suffering of someone else. It's not always in the glorious moments where we're recognized and we're celebrated on stage or at our baptism or in this aha moment where the Spirit moves in us and changes us and radically, kind of a Paul moment where we see God in his glory and we say, yes, I'm going to follow. In this case, discipleship happened when Simon helped Jesus carry the crossbeam to his own crucifixion. So when they get there, they get to a place called Golgotha, Aramaic for place of the skull. Jesus is nailed to the cross between two others, right? In the Greek that is used to describe what these two others on each side of Jesus, why they're being crucified along with Jesus, the Greek word here is lestai, which is used for rebels or insurrectionists. These people aren't thieves. It's not the thief on the cross like we hear about in songs and in movies. These are rebels. These are people who tried to go to battle against Rome and overthrow them. And once again, we see Jesus in the company of insurrectionists, of revolutionaries, of rebels against the authorities. The difference is that they were violent in their means. They sought to take weapons and go to battle against their Roman oppressors. Jesus sought to overthrow oppressive powers as well. But the way he did it was completely different. It was through love and sacrifice and nonviolence. The end is the same. All three of them end up on crosses. But the means to getting there is 100% different. And just sort of foreshadowing, the only movement of those three that's still alive today and thriving is the movement that Jesus launched. So I think that's something to keep in mind. So Rome reserved crucifixion for those they considered threats to its power. The message of the cross was clear. This is what happens to those who challenge us, who challenge empire. But in this case, Rome is lifting up the very one who's going to expose the limits of their means, their violence, and their oppressive nature. So the soldiers offer Jesus wine mixed with gall, a kind of painkiller, and he refuses. Matthew 27. He chooses to face the suffering while he's fully awake. And that's an important decision that he makes. He's not detached from the human pain. He's entering it without any defenses, without any guards up, without any remedies. And I think that this moment in the cross shows us that divine love, true love, doesn't stay distant from suffering. It shares in it. The Gospels describe the crucifixion with a lot of simplicity, interestingly. They don't go into a lot of detail. You know, the crucifixion became and still is the celebrated moment in the Christian faith, in the Jesus movement. And even early on, we saw evidence of early Jesus followers celebrating the crucifixion with images of crosses, Jesus on the cross. But in this moment when the gospel writers are recalling this and reflecting on this and really living this moment out as they write it down in their gospels, I almost get the impression that it's a little much for them to write about in too much detail. So they simply say they crucified him. No details of the nails, no dramatization. They just leave it there. And I think the power actually lies in the understatement. This is how God's kingdom takes shape, through weakness, through service, through love, carried out to its bitter end. As Jesus is hanging on the cross, remember people are mocking him. Religious leaders say that he saved others, but he can't save himself. The reality is he could save himself, but in saving himself, he can't save us. He can't save everyone else. So he has to choose, am I going to save myself and prove myself? Because this is the interesting thing. He could have saved himself. He could have, in that moment, demonstrated that he's God, that he's the Son of God, that he's divine, that he's powerful, that he could come along and defeat the powers of this world by disarming them right there. But that doesn't get at the heart of the issue. If he saves himself, he cannot defeat death and sin and save us. So he allows death to exhaust its power to the full, so that once it's punched itself out, essentially, he's going to rise up and defeat it once and for all. So we get some details from the gospel writers. From noon until mid-afternoon, darkness covers the land, Mark 15:33. And this is kind of a recollection of instances in the Hebrew Bible, like Amos 8:9, where the sun darkens as a sign of judgment. The creation is reacting to what's happening to its creator. And then Jesus prays the opening line of Psalm 22, my God, why have you forsaken me? Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani. This isn't a cry just of faith. This, I think, is a cry of despair. Jesus, in his humanness, just like we saw in the Garden of Gethsemane, he's truly hurt. He's hurting physically, but he's also truly heartbroken that this is where things have had to come. And I think he is in a moment of true despair. And I think that's not blasphemous to say. I don't think it's taking away from who Jesus is in his divine side. I just think it's allowing us to see Jesus in his humanity as well. And a lot of theological moves are made on the part of interpreters to try to sort of sanitize this. Well, Jesus wasn't crying out, "Why have you forsaken me, God?" He was quoting Psalm 22, which is a royal psalm, a psalm of David, and it's more of a statement of power that God's going to make all of this work out in his honor and in his favor. I think that's there too. But I also think there's a true moment in which Jesus is crying out to God and saying, "Where are you? I need you at my most critical time and you're not here." And I think that's okay to see. So he prays even in agony, and the beauty of this psalm is that it does end in trust and vindication. If you continue to read the psalm, which Jesus doesn't end up quoting or crying out, but it does end in vindication. And I think it reminds us that even our lament, even our cries to God can coexist with confidence in his vindication, that he's going to come through. Not long after Jesus dies. And when he does so, we read that the temple curtain tears from top to bottom. So that's the veil that symbolizes the boundary between God's presence and the people. That keeps it's a boundary between humans and God. Jesus tears it because, just as he had predicted, just as has declared in John 2, and then more recently in his final week in his attacks on the temple system, he says there are no more barriers between God and humanity. There's no economic, there's no social, there's no national, there's no political, there's no ethnic boundaries that can stand between God and humans. And that moment happened at Jesus' death. The separation between heaven and earth has been obliterated. And this is interesting. The first person to respond to what's happening firsthand is a Roman centurion, according to Mark 15:13. And he cries out, "Truly this man was the Son of God." It's an incredible statement. It's a Roman officer, part of the machinery of execution in this moment, standing there enforcing this process, ensuring that Jesus is hung on the cross properly, ensuring that Jesus is on his cross suffering to the greatest extent, ensuring that at the end of this process, Jesus is no longer alive. That man recognizes Jesus as Son of God. The insiders have been condemned, but this outsider sees the truth. And the Gospels consistently show that revelation like this often comes from unexpected people and unexpected places and unexpected moments. The people and the places and the moments that are pushed outside of what is acceptable. The people who are supposed to recognize God are the ones who never do. The people who aren't supposed to, the people for whom that barrier, that veil was put in place to keep out, those are the ones who always end up recognizing the truth. That's an encouragement to you and me, but it's also pretty strong caution. That the moment we think we're on the inside is the moment we better do some serious self-reflection to make sure we're not actually the ones who are missing Jesus. I think that's important. So after the crucifixion, several of the women stay near the cross. Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, Salome. and they don't speak, but they remain present. And I think that this is important. Their loyalty, again, is a deliberate contrast to the abandonment of all of the male disciples. So this is, remember, women don't matter in Jesus's world. Jesus comes along and elevates women to equality with the men, equality with male, time and again, time and again. And even at his crucifixion, women are the ones who prove faithful. When all of these men, all of the men, especially those who had direct access to Jesus for the last 2 years of his life, they're nowhere to be seen. In a culture where women's testimony carried little to no weight, they are the primary witnesses of all of this. And the gospel writers make sure to record all of this. So then we get to the removal of Jesus's body from the cross. And we come across a man named Joseph of Arimathea. And he's a respected member of the council. He goes personally and asks Pilate for permission to bury Jesus's body. And another man, we've already encountered him in Jesus's campaign, Nicodemus, joins him, and they bring spices, myrrh, aloes, the kind used specifically for royal burials. And they wrap Jesus's body and they place it in a new tomb, and it ends up that the one executed as a rebel is actually being buried, another moment of irony, as a king. And the religious leaders ask Pilate to guard the tomb because they're afraid the disciples might steal the body, because they remember some of Jesus's words about resurrection and returning to life. And they're doing what they can to prevent that this sort of a myth, this sort of a message might be spread. And they want to make sure that this tomb is guarded so that nobody can come along and steal Jesus's body at night. And Matthew actually includes another really fascinating moment. So when Jesus dies, the earth quakes, and Matthew reports that tombs open. Matthew 27, 51 and 52. And this is really fascinating. It's language drawn from the prophets, where when a divine moment of judgment or a momentous event in heaven occurs, creation feels its impact. And in this moment in particular, Jesus has broken the jaw of death. So death in the physical form of these tombs in caves and hewn, carved out tombs in the sides of hills, it's almost like death. The underworld has swallowed these bodies. And in this moment, Matthew reports that this earthquake occurs, and these previously deceased saints rise from their graves and start walking out. And eventually they become ambassadors for Jesus after he ascends. But at this moment, Jesus has broken death's grip. It's almost like he's gone in his own moment of death and clawed open death's jaws and said, "You've got to release them now, because I'm giving you myself in their place." It's a really fascinating moment. So you've got to understand the crucifixion, even right here, it's not just about forgiveness of the bad things that you and I have done. This is about the transformation of the entire order of the cosmos. Death no longer reigns as it once has. Jesus does. And death no longer has claim to those who have fallen, because Jesus has given himself over in their place. So this scene, I think, brings us to the heart of what Jesus' kingship actually means. He could have resisted with violence or sought revenge. And in a lot of ways, that would have accomplished what he set out to do, and that's launch a movement. But instead, he demonstrates true strength and power through restraint. He demonstrates divine love through suffering, not violence, and true victory, cosmic, heavenly, celestial victory through faithfulness. The cross is not the failure of his moment, it's the foundation of Jesus's movement. Early Christians began to see the cross in a different way from the way Romans wanted it to be seen. It was no longer a symbol of defeat, but it was the moment when divine love in the person of Jesus absorbed the worst that evil empire could offer, and it did not return it in kind. Instead of fighting back, it became a sign of hope, not fear. The way of Jesus doesn't avoid pain or injustice. It meets pain and injustice with endurance and with trust. The God's justice, the divine way that things should operate runs deeper than any human system, no matter how good that system is or how bad. Human systems are just inadequate. And I think in this moment, the crucifixion teaches us that when everything seems lost, when the world seems to be falling apart around us, that being faithful to the mission and the plan that God has set forth before us, it still matters. When the world rewards force, when the politicians are reclaiming the world for Christ, but they're doing so using oppression and using violence and using injustice and using segregation and using economic inequality, Jesus shows us the power of love that looks like sacrifice for my neighbor. When others are reacting in violence and anger, Jesus always responds with dignity and in peace. And his silence, once again, it's not surrender. It's not weakness. It's easy to go off and fight back. It's hard to restrain yourself when you're staring into horrible injustice. But Jesus shows us, I think, that silence isn't surrender. It's a type of confidence that truth doesn't need violence in order to prove itself and to win the day. This was Jesus's battle with death. And through this battle, Jesus brought about the beginning of an entirely new way of being human. Leko Mod, go and learn. Come back for scene 27 of the JesusX30 challenge.